time for the latest edition of What's the Word, the radio broadcast that brings you news of our Area 1 community. I'm Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford, and now here's the host of What's the Word, Mr. Frank Fisher of the USAG Red Cloud and Area 1 Public Affairs Office.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of What's the Word. If you're an enlisted soldier, you've probably heard that there are ways that qualified enlisted soldiers can become commissioned officers. For example, if you're an enlisted soldier who hopes to attend West Point, the Army has a prep school for West Point. It helps qualified soldiers get ready for West Point's exacting academic and physical demands. There's also, of course, OCS, Officer Candidate School. There's ROTC, or Reserve Officers Training Corps, and there's a program known as Green to Gold. We'll hear about the path from enlisted soldier to officer from today's guest, who himself began his Army career as an enlisted soldier and later became an officer. He is Colonel Brandon D. Newton, Commander, U.S. Army Garrison Red Cloud and Area 1. Colonel Newton became the Area 1 Commander last month. We're very glad to have him on What's the Word, and he's the perfect person to tell you about going from enlisted soldier to officer. First, though, here are a few facts about Colonel Newton. He enlisted in 1987 and became an infantryman. He was later commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry branch. That was through the Green to Gold program. In the years since, he's led combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is a senior parachutist, a ranger, and he's been awarded the Combat Infantryman Badge. And he's also graduated from some of the U.S. military's most prestigious schools. They include the Command and General Staff College, the School of Advanced Military Studies, and the U.S. Army War College. But, as we've said, he started in the enlisted ranks. He knows what it is to be a junior enlisted soldier. So, now let's hear from him on going from enlisted soldier to officer. Colonel Newton, how old were you? Let me start with that. How old were you when you enlisted?
I was 21 years old, just turned 21 when I enlisted.
And why did you enlist?
Like probably most, some people, I won't say all, but I was not the best student initially, right out of high school, and I found that after a couple years of college, I needed to find something that maybe gave me a little more purpose, and the Army was certainly attractive for all the reasons I think folks join now. I wanted to be an airborne ranger, and so I started to pursue that objective.
What made you decide to become an officer? What made you want to do that?
I thought after my initial time, I was a rank grade specialist, and I had a lot of NCOs especially that talked to me about your ability to affect soldiers at a larger level if you're an officer. And certainly it was not my intent to become an officer. I really enjoyed being a 11 Bravo private, a specialist, but I wanted to finish my college education, and then I really thought that I had the skills where I could do more good in larger organizations.
Were you getting signs of recognition from some of the leaders, NCOs and officers in your unit? People sense that you had the potential to be a good officer?
Certainly not in the beginning. I wasn't. I was an average soldier and pretty much did my job as a private. I did manage to complete Ranger School as a PFC, and so I kind of understood that based on the unit I was in and some of the early challenges that I overcame, that I knew I had the ability if I wanted to continue on and operate at a higher level.
We have a little less than 1 minute. Just tell people, please, in a nutshell, what Green to Gold is.
So Green to Gold is one of the, as you indicated, the commissioning routes. Green to Gold will allow you to leave active duty or leave the enlisted ranks and then enter ROTC, complete ROTC, and then receive your commission, either in the active force or the reserve component. But it allows you to receive a scholarship, to leave your current commitment, and then move straight into ROTC.
One of the things I'm eager to ask you, and we'll cover it in the next segment, is what your buddies said when they heard that you were going to be going to officer training. But first, we'll hand back to Sergeant Crawford and be back after the break.
Getting you back into the music, it's Selena Gomez with The Heart Wants What It Wants on AFN. We're back with What's the Word Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. And today on What's the Word, we're talking about how qualified enlisted soldiers have a chance to enter the officer ranks. We're doing that with our guest, Colonel Brandon D. Newton, who himself went from enlisted soldier to officer. He's currently commander of U.S. Army Garrison Red Cloud in Area 1. Colonel Newton, I said just before we went to the break that I'm eager to hear what the reaction was of your buddies when they heard that you were going on to officer training.
So unusual at the time, I don't know. I had at least 4 other specialists at the time and a couple E5s that also did green to gold or left the company and had gone into commissioning sources. So it wasn't all that unusual, and this time it was 1989 for what at the time was a new program for people for enlisted soldiers to attempt to apply and then be accepted and then become officers. My platoon leader would tease me immediately from the start. He every time I saluted him, he called me Cadet Newton. From the minute I was applying until the time I left, I was, he was giving me it was a good natured, but he called me Cadet Newton. What I found interesting is many of the people that I served with in 1989 when I left, the company commander that signed my green to gold packet wound up being a deputy commanding general for me when I was a major. My platoon sergeant at the time, I wound up being a company XO with him as the first sergeant in Alaska some years later. So you wind up circling back to a lot of good friends and people you've served with in a lot of different ways, and so it's been a good to see that those things come together even later down the road.
I can imagine. Do you remember what you were thinking and feeling the day that you actually graduated and became a second lieutenant?
I do. I was. This was 1992, so similar to now, the Army had just moved from 18 divisions to 10 divisions at the time, and so we were changing the nature of our mission and the size. And I was very excited just to be accepted as an active duty lieutenant at the time, and I was proud. I was proud that I had done well in school. The Army had prepared me as an enlisted soldier to perform in college as an ROTC cadet in ways that my peers who had not had that experience, they were not prepared as I was. So I was really proud.
That's a very important aspect of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did that work? What was it about having been a soldier that helped you as a college student?
Certainly the little older, so I had some maturity. I had been given a lot of responsibility as a junior enlisted soldier. That makes you put things in perspective when you're a college student, and you realize that the responsibilities that we place on junior leaders can certainly help them when they're out in the so-called real world. And I think that that really helped me more than anything, and it led me to have a much more mature outlook on what I was there to do in college, what my objectives were, what my goals were, how much college costs. I understood those things much more significantly as a former enlisted soldier.
Was there any benefit that you recall just in organizing time and assignment load and that kind of thing that resulted from having been a soldier?
Yes, so that within the first or second semester, I think, and it's been 26 years, but I made Dean's List, which was, like I said, I wasn't the best college student the first time around, and the ability to manage time, and I had a job, I was in ROTC, and I was still able to do really well in my studies, which surprised even me. And so you have an enormous amount of stress and variables put on you as a soldier at any rank, private through general, and your duties are the same in terms of what they mean to the nation. And I think that many times as a junior enlisted soldier, you may feel that somehow you don't have that part to play, but the skills you're learning, the role you play in the mission of the Army is going to carry you on through much less difficult times later on in life.
And since you've becoming an officer, I should say, Have you found over the years that your enlisted background has helped you in interacting with soldiers, in leading soldiers?
Yes, and I think there's a balance. Certainly I'm not the first former enlisted soldier to become an officer. We have lots of peers and soldiers out there, have lots of leaders that were enlisted. But it helps you definitely achieve or understand a balance between just humanness. I would say your understanding of how you lead your platoons and your companies. You tend to understand that we're all there as adults. We're all there we're here as volunteers, and that we all need to be treated with a level of responsibility commensurate with that act of volunteering.
And we'll follow up on that interesting point when we're back after the break. Thank you.
And I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices. Nick Jonas featuring Tav Lowe at Close right here on AFN KC the Eagle, where we're serving America's best. We're back with What's the Word Hour, and here's Mr. Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. We're back with the Area 1 Commander, Colonel Brandon D. Newton, and we're talking about how qualified soldiers can go from the enlisted ranks to commissioned officer. Just before the break, Colonel Newton was telling us about what advantages he'd found in leading soldiers as an officer that was a result of his having been an enlisted soldier. And Colonel Newton, would you tell us a little more about that, please?
Sure. I think it's important for especially junior officers at the company grade level to be cognizant of their duty to be proficient at their own skills and tasks, and that's something that I think is reinforced to you if you've started off as a junior enlisted soldier. The training you receive on the basics form a foundation that really will carry you through all the way through any rank, and that ability to understand how important it is for you to carry your own bag, know how to work your radio, understand basic skills, warrior tasks, is important not only for soldiers, NCOs, but for officers. And so that certainly shaped some of the ways that I not only led other officers, but also performed as an officer myself.
And that brings us very conveniently to the topic of the qualities that a soldier who hopes to be an officer really ought to have, of what it takes to be a good officer. Tell us about that, please.
We all have common sets of Army values that we follow, and so there are some things that are universal for all of us, whether we're soldiers, officers, non-commissioned officers, warrant officers. I think there are things that if you think about yourself in another place in your life as a commissioned officer, that you need to understand the importance of things like selfless service. No shortage of that in either enlisted ranks, non-commissioned officers, or warrant officers, but your duties and your oath require a certain amount of perspective and selflessness as an officer, and I think that's extremely important that you internalize that if you desire a commission. You have to have a dominant sense of duty. You have to understand that you drive the character of the organization. You may not know how to do certain things, and you're going to certainly learn. I used to tell my lieutenants, and this has always been a theme for most branches in our Army, that when you're a lieutenant, we're training you to be a company commander, and your non-commissioned officers are a huge part of that training, and your company commander and your battalion commander are a part of that training. But you, even though you may not know how to do something, you have to drive the character, the competence, the Army as a profession for that organization from day one, and you have to understand that you as a newly commissioned officer, you have that responsibility, that role.
And when you speak of driving the character of the company, of the unit, in what sense do you mean? Beyond, you've given some examples, but could you tell us a little more about that? Sure.
It's setting the example. It's understanding that you have a responsibility to ensure that you are the caretaker of our values and our character and really our Army. I mean, we often, I think, make the mistake of thinking that we have a shortened, or we're only here for the now, and maybe our time period isn't necessarily a career. It's not necessarily 10 years. Maybe we're on a first-term enlistment, but you have a place in a long 241-year history, and you can take your own example from those who came before you, and you are a part of those who will come after you. And so driving the character and understanding the profession is your duty, not just as an officer, but I think it's important to understand your role if you desire to become a commissioned officer.
If for the enlisted soldiers who are hearing you right now, or who will hear a recording of this that we'll be posting to the Area 1 YouTube channel at some point soon, for those who are hearing this, if a soldier is saying to himself or herself, do I maybe have what it takes to be a good officer, or what should I ask myself, what would you tell them? We have a little less than a minute in this segment.
I would tell them to think about how they best want to affect the organization. Certainly, I even had second thoughts when I was no longer on the path to become a non-commissioned officer, and that's something that I really had wanted to do. I was getting ready to attend PLDC at the time, which is not the name of the course now. And I was when I received my commission, I was concerned that maybe I would miss some things, and you will. The roles are different, and you have to decide that you want to affect the organization at a much larger level, and that's key.
Thank you. We're back after the break.
We're back with What's the Word Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. And if you're just joining us, we're talking with Area 1 Commander Colonel Brandon D. Newton, and we're talking about how qualified enlisted soldiers have a chance to become commissioned officers. Just before we hear more from Colonel Newton, I want you to know that if you want the details on any of the Army's pathways to a commission, a good place to start is to contact any of the Area 1 education centers. They can fill you in, they can help you figure out which one of these programs might be the best for you. Colonel Newton, is there anything that you'd like to add to our conversation this afternoon?
What I'd like to tell soldiers, if you have always kind of wondered, who does this and who might be these future commissioned officers of the Army, I just want to tell you that you possibly are that person, and don't think for a minute that somehow you don't have the skills, regardless of your rank, E3, E4, non-commissioned officer, to be a commissioned officer. I can tell you that what you know and the responsibility that we place upon you in your current MOS, whatever it is, will well prepare you. And as you wonder and you wonder if that's for you, seek out other NCOs, officers, and talk to them and get their perspective. But never for a minute think that you are not that person and that you don't have the potential to be a commissioned officer if that's your goal.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add? You were talking earlier in the broadcast about the traits, the things that go into making a good officer. Sure.
You can see the book I brought with me. It's a 1943 officer's guide, and it's to me a really important book because it talks a lot about some of the same things that we have now in 2016 with the decade plus of persistent conflict following 9/11. In 1943, the Army was building itself into a force that would eventually invade Europe, conquer the Germans, and defeat the Japanese after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. So it was a difficult time, and just to read some of the words and see some of the commonalities, it makes you understand that for whatever your trial is, whatever your challenge is, whether you're a soldier, family member, there are so many people who have done what you are doing now or have gone through that same trial, and it gives you some solace. So I'm a fan of learning as much as we can about those who came before us, honoring them, and knowing that you're not the first one and you won't be the last one. Someday there'll be soldiers who are still wearing a second and unpatch or a patch of the unit you're in, 1st Cavalry Division, and you'll be a part of that history. So I'd just like to leave you with that.
We have a little bit of time left, and I wonder if there's anything that you consider maybe one of your most memorable memories of the time that you were a junior officer soon after having made that transition from enlisted to officer?
So I had a great first duty station, and I was sent to Alaska, to Fort Richardson. I was in the 117th Buffaloes, and then after that in the 1st of Iowa 1st. And that was a great opportunity for me to go far from where I had generally been from, the Southeast. I was stationed at Hunter Army Airfield as an enlisted soldier, and I was newly married, and so that first duty station always brings back fond memories. It was challenging. The environmental conditions were challenging, but the thing I remember most about that, it was such a great environment. It was a great team, and it really set those leaders at the time. And this is where you need to understand that you can have an impact on future generations of soldiers and officers. Those leaders at the time and my first duty station really committed me to the Army for what's now been 26 years.
Thank you. Our thanks indeed to today's guest, Colonel Brandon D. Newton, Commander, U.S. Army Garrison Red Cloud and Area 1. What's the Word airs every other Thursday at 3 p.m. here on AFN KCV Eagle. You've heard the Colonel talk today about the transition from enlisted to officer, and by all means, think about it and think about what he said. He encourages soldiers to not assume that you might not be a future officer. I'm Frank Fisher of the Area 1 Public Affairs Office. I've been your host for What's the Word, handing back now to my What's the Word broadcast partner, AFN KCDJ Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Here's Sergeant Crawford.
And as Mr. Fisher said, thanks for joining us for this edition of What's the Word, and I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices.